Welcome to Friday Friends, RI Elder Info's weekly look at the organizations and individuals providing resources for Rhode Island seniors, caregivers, and professionals.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It is Friday morning, and you are watching me, Deb Burton, Executive Director of RI Elder Info, here on our weekly show, Friday Friends, where we bring you information that you or someone you know needs to know about. So please make sure you hit the like button, the share button, all of those social media cues that say, hey, check this out. Because today's topic is something that is becoming more and more common as we are aging independently alone at home. So this is going to be a super important topic to really get the word out on. Now, as you all know, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we could not do this without the support of our sponsors. I am very grateful to Point 32 Health Foundation, United Healthcare, Oak Street Health, of course, 321 Media, and especially McCarthy Law, our sponsor for Friday Friends. Here's a moment with McCarthy Law.
Here at McCarthy Law, we practice in the areas of estate planning, long-term care planning, elder care law, and residential real estate. Our focus is really on providing peace of mind to our clients.
If you're interested in scheduling a consultation with our office, you can feel free to reach out to us at 401-541-5540. You can also reach out via website at www.mccarthylawri.com. You also should check out our social media, both on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for some helpful tips and tricks.
Welcome, Attorney Jennifer Haskins.
Hi, Deb. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad to have you. The issue about adult guardianships and powers of attorney, as a way to be proactive in planning, I think is one of those topics that people get nervous about talking about. So I'm really glad you're able to come on today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about. I see it in different facets of the work that I do. I do estate planning for our firm. I also do probate and guardianships for adults. So I see how crucial these documents can be at different phases. I think that, and I'll just start out by saying this, I think that powers of attorney are probably the most important estate planning documents you can have in place. I think they're such an important way, no matter what age you are, no matter where you are in that stage. I think it is one of the best ways to advocate for yourself and for your decision-making for financial and healthcare decisions. And I think it's probably the kindest document you can create for your family. So, there's all different types of powers of attorney. We'll get into that, I'm sure. But just kind of having it in mind and seeing it from that more holistic perspective, that it's not just about having the documents in place. It's about having those conversations with your family to make those difficult decisions a little bit easier if that time ever comes.
Absolutely. So what are powers of attorney? What are they? What do they do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, the powers of attorney that you hear of, there is, it allows individuals essentially to designate or select somebody that they trust to handle financial decision-making or medical decision-making if they became incapacitated. So the idea behind the powers of attorney is when you have the capacity to choose that decision maker, who feels comfortable in that role for you? Who do you feel comfortable making a financial or a healthcare decision if you are in a scenario where you could not make that decision for yourself anymore? So, the financial power of attorney, there's something called a durable power of attorney and a springing power of attorney. Those are two terms that are really important to understand the difference for financial decision making.
Okay, I'll bite. What's the difference?
Good. So the difference between them, so a durable financial power of attorney means it goes into effect upon you signing. So as soon as you sign the document, that is, valid and effective. If you're incapacitated, that individual can start to make decisions on your behalf without delay. A springing power of attorney, there's a little bit of additional legwork that needs to be done before they can start to make financial decisions. So there needs to be the certification of incapacity from a physician for them to start making those kind of financial decisions on your behalf. I typically recommend the durable power of attorney. The reason for that is in an emergency situation. I find the durable power of attorney to be really effective in assuring that that loved one that you trust can step in and start to make those decisions without delay if decisions needed to be made very quickly. But I also can understand if someone's a little hesitant to give that authority effective immediately upon you signing, you might want to have a little bit of those guardrails in place. I think the springing power of attorney can kind of ease a little bit of that tension to say, this is only going to come into play in that scenario. So those are really kind of the crucial pieces when it comes to financial decision making. And your power of attorney can do quite a bit of things for you, right? They can do anything from accessing your bank account to write checks or pay bills. They can re-register your car for you. They could pay your taxes for you. If you were in the middle of litigation, they could represent you in court, right? So things like that. It's a very powerful position for somebody to have. You want to make sure it's somebody that you know and you kind of trust in that role to be able to do those things for you.
Now, I want to ask for your healthcare power of attorney. If I name my daughter as my healthcare power of attorney and I'm making decisions that she doesn't like, does that give her the ability to just put me in a nursing home? Or like, when does a healthcare power of attorney go into effect where she could make decisions for me?
Yeah, that's a great question. So your healthcare power of attorney, that power and that, ability to make those healthcare decisions would only come into play in a scenario where you were incapacitated and you were unable to make those decisions for yourself. And, your healthcare agent, really important to kind of understand some of the statutory requirements, right? So just a couple of them, right? For your daughter, let's say if your daughter's a minor, right? She can't serve as your healthcare power of attorney. So they have to be at least 18. That's really important to know. They have to have capacity themselves to make that decision. They can't do anything that's illegal. So we have to make sure we're kind of conforming to Rhode Island statutory law, right? And on top of that, they can't do anything that's contrary to your known wishes. So that's really important. Your healthcare power of attorney is an incredible place to be able to advocate for yourself. So you can put certain directives within that healthcare power of attorney. Typically, it'll ask you questions about your preferences for things like life-sustaining treatment, organ donation, artificial feeding. Not easy conversations to have, right? Not easy things to talk about. Incredibly important to be able to make sure that it's clear how you feel. I think it's an impossible decision to have to make for a loved one, to have a little bit of guidance as to what you would want if that scenario presented itself. I think it makes that impossible decision a little less impossible, knowing that you're doing what they would want you to do in that scenario. And I think that comes with ongoing conversation as well, right? I'm still having that conversation with my mom, and I do this every day because it's more nuanced than the document sometimes, right? It's just kind of figuring that out and saying, well, maybe for myself, I know that I wouldn't want prolonged treatment if I was in a scenario where I needed life-sustaining treatment. But what if I was in a car accident and a physician told my husband that, they can put me on a ventilator for 48 hours and there's a 50% chance of recovery? Well, he knows that I don't want life-prolonging treatment, but this is a little bit more nuanced than, the classic scenario. So what does he do then, right? So it's kind of making sure that you're having those conversations with loved ones as you see people go through these types of things, or you hear something on the news, or you're listening to this podcast and it starts to bring up some of those feelings, right? So it's just continuing to have the conversation too over time.
I think a lot of times people don't realize that these conversations are super important, but they are very nuanced. And so it becomes a lot of things that are really easy to avoid talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're somebody that has avoided talking about any of this, and there's a catastrophic event that has happened. You've had a stroke, or you've been in a car accident, or the dementia has progressed. What are the options then to make sure that the person gets what they need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if they are at that point and something significant has happened that's affected their capacity, and maybe they haven't had, not only have they not had the conversation, they haven't put any of these documents in place, right? Maybe that's not something that has come up because you just want to talk about it. And I can understand that as an estate planning attorney. It's not always easy to talk about. I get that. There is a process, certainly if there is nothing in place. And it's a process that, you certainly have heard of before. I'm sure many of your viewers have heard of the process of establishing a guardianship. So, it is a court process, and that's important to know that there is court oversight. You need to petition to somebody in your life would need to petition to the court in order to have the ability and access to things like financial decision-making or healthcare decision-making. And it's not something that the court takes lightly, right? This is essentially you petitioning to the court to say, this individual is no longer capable of making their own decisions. I am now, asking you as the judge to appoint this individual to now be in charge of their care, right? Whether that looks like, just being in charge of financial decision-making or, guardianship over the person, which could mean personal decision-making, healthcare decisions. It is it can be, a little more arduous of a process, right? You're subject to court's approval, even for things like setting up estate planning for them. It needs to go through the court and needs to be evaluated. They need to determine if the individual who wants to act as your guardian is fit to be your guardian. So there's, some background that gets done, and there's a physician that needs to evaluate the loved one who might be subject to a guardianship to see what their capacity looks like. They appoint, the guardian ad litem, right? The guardian ad litem steps in. It's an individual who's really kind of a fact finder for the court. So they meet with the proposed guardian. They meet with the individual who might be subject to the guardianship. And they assess, in their own opinion, whether or not a guardianship is appropriate for this person, and whether or not the loved one or individual is, who's proposing to be the guardian can serve in that role, whether they have reservations about that. So there's, a significant amount of time, costs, and red tape that goes into establishing a guardianship. We often hope that it's, a last resort. Because it is an ongoing process as well. I think that's a misconception a lot of people don't know about. They say they want to get a guardianship for their grandmother or for their mother who's now developed dementia, right? But it's not just setting up a guardianship. There's a lot more that goes into it.
And who decides if somebody isn't able to make their own decisions? Like, is that something that the doctor evaluates, or can I just say like, oh, my mom, she needs help, so I want to be her guardian? Who assesses that?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. And it's kind of a few individuals that really kind of weigh in on that, right? So let's say you came to our firm and you had a meeting with me and you said, I have this loved one. They're currently in an assisted living, and they've developed, I believe they've developed dementia. I don't believe they're able to kind of make these decisions anymore. I want to be their guardian. Okay, well, right off the bat, I'm going to have a little bit of caution in moving forward with that. I want to know, do they have a formal diagnosis? Do we have any documentation of that diagnosis? I'm going to want to speak with or meet this individual and assess their capacity myself before I can determine whether I think a guardianship would be appropriate, or if there's a less restrictive means to be able to, assist with that decision-making, whether that is powers of attorney or, supported decision-making, something to that effect that's a little less, restrictive. And then, let's say I do meet with this individual and I can see that they do have some significant capacity issues, and they don't have an understanding of who they are or where they are or kind of what's going on in their day to day, and they're not able to make those day-to-day decisions. Well, then we will begin the process of setting up a guardianship, but it doesn't end there, right? That's one opinion from an attorney. We're going to want to make sure that other individuals weigh in on that as well. So typically a physician will need to complete something referred to as a DMAT. So it's a decision-making assessment tool. And it's essentially, an overall assessment where a physician will go through, their ability to make individual decisions about relationships in their life, decisions about their residency, healthcare decisions, what their diagnoses are, and whether or not they think a guardianship would be appropriate too. So that's kind of the additional step. And then we get to the guardian ad litem, which is typically appointed by the court in the town where you live. So now you're subject to that guardian ad litem appointed by the court, meeting with you to determine whether they think it's appropriate. And then ultimately the judge, right? The judge will take all of this into account. They'll review the DMAT. They'll review this medical assessment. They'll review the guardian ad litem's report. So this individual that's done the fact finding, they'll review that as well. They'll look at the criminal background potentially of the proposed guardian to see if there are any major red flags concerning the safety or efficiency of their ability to serve. And then they'll speak with the attorney or the proposed guardian in person in court, typically at a hearing, to say, ask them a couple of questions about their ability to serve. So there's a lot of decision makers that are involved, which can be, really protective in one sense, but then also stepping back and seeing, today, if I was able to set up powers of attorney for somebody that I knew who still had the capacity to make that decision, you could avoid all of that oversight and kind of red tape and make sure that it's the person that you want and you trust to be in that role, rather than all of these other decision makers who don't truly know you making that decision for you. Having others determine what's in your best interest rather than determining for yourself what's in your best interest. I mean, it's huge. So we always say, if you can do the powers of attorney, if you have the capacity to do so, imagine how much stress and, cost and time you would save your family by having that in place, right? How much, you're always concerned that somebody who presents with good intentions is now in a position where maybe they shouldn't be. Or
absolutely. And there's a certain amount of a control freak in me. And I feel like by having my powers of attorney in place now, it has given me the ability to spell out exactly what I want and don't want, so that I know that that's going to be honored, because I've taken the steps to do that. But it also means that if there's a time that those documents need to go into effect, that it's not, did mom want this? Did mom want that? It's all spelled out. And I feel like that gives peace of mind. And it also helps my control freak.
As a control freak, I would definitely agree with that sentiment. I think it's critical. Absolutely. And you can be as specific as you need to be for those documents, right? I think that is a really effective way to advocate for yourself and to also make sure that your family is involved in that decision. I think the documents themselves can only get you so far, and the fact that you're able to continue to have those conversations is great, but also thinking about that intentionally, right? Thinking before you go in to get those documents done, how do I feel about these topics? How do I feel about organ donation? How do I feel about life support or ventilation? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my family? Who in my family do I think would be able to make that type of decision? Not comfortably. It's never going to be comfortable.
Right.
but who is kind of that right person that would be your advocate. I do think for healthcare power of attorney as well, we always think about the emergency scenarios, but I would also say it's really important to think about who would be kind of your go-to for a day-to-day healthcare decision, right? If you lost capacity, I know Alzheimer's is in my family, right?
Mhm.
I had significant memory loss when I'm older. Who would I feel comfortable being the individual who takes me to the doctor, who's speaking with physicians on my behalf and making those day-to-day decisions too? I'm a control freak, and I want to make sure that it's somebody that I love and trust in that role. And I'm also an attorney. My husband jokes that I speak in contingencies. So I'm always thinking about, well, if this person isn't available, or, maybe they're traveling or something like that, right? Who is the next available? So just some of those factors you want to think about too, right? So who's available to kind of make those day-to-day decisions? Thinking about locality is huge. You might really love and trust an individual in your life, an adult child, something like that. But if they live in Texas, and you live in Rhode Island, you might want to make sure that there are other individuals available as well who can get to you in an emergency. So just kind of thinking about the different factors that weigh into it too. But you're exactly right? Those documents are really a way to advocate for yourself. They're a resource. You can get really specific about your preferences. For organ donation, we will ask you about things like, not just are you comfortable with organ donation, but for what purposes are you comfortable with it, right? Some people are really comfortable with organ donation, but only if it goes to somebody else, only for transplantation reasons. But maybe they don't feel comfortable with donating their body to medical research or education, right? Those are important things to talk about that maybe you've never talked about with your family before.
Absolutely. And the other thing, that when you have a loved one who's having a medical crisis, it adds a lot of pressure to all the different family dynamics. And I feel like when you have that paperwork done ahead of time,
Yeah.
it kind of solves that, oh, you want mom on life support because you want to be able to do blah, blah, blah. Well, you want to disconnect mom because, mom always liked you best and you're going to get blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It solves like that bickering that ordinarily would not have bubbled to the top if it weren't for that crisis situation where everybody ordinarily would have gotten along. But now everything is running high and hot. And, without that guidance, it can fuel family feuds that don't need to be.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that sentiment. And even I think of it, of course, emotions are running extremely high. And it brings a lot of things to the surface in those emergency moments. And also, you might not be thinking as clearly or as rationally as you typically do, right? So, like I said, the conversations are incredibly important to have. But also in those moments of crisis, you might not remember every conversation you had with mom or dad when you were going through those documents. Having something clear and in writing as to what their wishes are absolutely gives that clarity in those moments of chaos, right? To say, this was the plan. We're going to stick with the plan that they would want. It's clear what their intentions are. We're going to honor those intentions. And it gives you peace of mind to say, no one can act in contrary to what you have in these documents. It gives you peace of mind to know that if you feel really strongly about not being on life prolonging treatment, which is pretty common, right, for a lot of individuals who are doing their healthcare power of attorney, you have some certainty in knowing that you're not going to be put in that scenario, right?
Right.
So I think it is really important to think about those family dynamics as well and think about who we want as decision makers. Sometimes it helps, with agents for healthcare decisions. Maybe we have, that one niece who, she's a nurse, she's really involved, or she's a doctor. She knows, kind of the medical industry, and we feel really strong and confident with that individual in that role. And maybe siblings will, there'll be some tension if they're all having to make that decision. Or maybe you recognize that this is a really difficult decision for one person to have to make. Maybe you feel comfortable with your two adult children being co-agents and making that decision together. Maybe that takes a little bit of the pressure off when they make that decision together too. So understanding your family dynamics is a huge part of it as well. I'll ask a lot of questions about that when I meet with my clients, just to make sure that who they have in place is suitable for them. And we're not just doing it so no one gets upset. We're doing it because it's the right thing for you. And it's going to, make sure that your wishes are honored.
So if people wanted to reach out to you, is that the 407-5975 number?
Yeah.
If they had questions?
Absolutely. That would be the best contact to reach us.
Yeah, that I think is the most important thing, because there's like so many different variables. One thing that I've seen on streaming lately, when somebody is appointed a guardian, is there any oversight to what they're doing with the person or the person's money?
Yeah, that's a really good question to ask. And I think it's important to understand, if you are the guardian of a loved one or another individual, there is absolutely oversight in that process. It is part of the ongoing kind of duties and responsibilities of the guardian. So oftentimes you will need to file something called an annual accounting to the court. They want to see how those funds are being utilized. It's a fiduciary role, which means that everything that you're doing must be in service of that individual, right? You don't get control of their finances and then get to run to Target and go on a shopping spree. There's going to be repercussions for that, legal repercussions, right? You want to make sure that everything that you're doing is necessary for their care, for their comfort, and for their well-being. And there is oversight in that. Typically, you're filing those accountings with the court. The court's reviewing to make sure that everything is, on the up and up and for their benefit. And you're also filing something called an annual status report. So were there significant changes in that individual's life? Was there, a change in their prognosis? Was there a change in their capacity that, maybe changes how restrictive this guardianship is? Those are all factors that are going to be accounted for. And there's, that absolute oversight in that process. And I do think it's important. I think you want to make sure that it keeps whoever's acting in that guardianship role accountable and responsible as to what they're doing with that individual's funds. And I think it's important for the court to, if it reaches that point, that they are taking note of that and they're doing their due diligence and making sure that that individual still has the care that they need and that, their funds that they have in place are being used responsibly. So I can understand on the one side the burden of that on the guardian to, make sure that they're doing these annual hearings and there are these filings, and it does add to the cost and expense of that process. But I also think it's so crucial to make sure that any individual who's lost capacity doesn't get taken advantage of or kind of lost in that system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am so glad that you were able to come on and talk about this, because I feel like this is one of those things that people shy away from until like the crisis is about to be there. So I'm super glad that you were able to come on and talk about this today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so passionate about it because I've seen it in so many facets, right? I've seen it professionally where they're coming to you in that crisis, or, I've seen it personally where somebody has the power of attorney and you really see somebody step up and really be that healthcare advocate that they needed, even in moments of temporary incapacity, right? Having somebody in your corner to be able to make the right decisions for you and to do right by you. It's one of the most important things you can do for yourself as a control freak or not. It's important to have in place at any age, at any stage of your life. So I'm happy to be able to talk about that. And hopefully it encourages someone to review their powers of attorney or to maybe put some documents in place so that they're not facing that crisis.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Everybody, it's so important that we be responsible for our decisions and making sure that we appoint someone to make our decisions known if we can't do it ourselves. It's better to have an ounce of prevention than the pound of cure, especially when it comes to our healthcare decisions. And if we need help handling our finances, you want to have those things in place ahead of time. So if you want to get that kind of paperwork done, don't hesitate to reach out to Jennifer. She really is wonderful and can sit down and have an honest conversation. And like she said, she's going to ask you a lot of questions because it's the things that you really need to think about that maybe you don't think about on a regular basis. Maybe they make you uncomfortable. She can make the conversation more comfortable. So give her a call at the 407-5975 number, and she'll be happy to walk you and your family members through this process, because you want to make sure that you retain as much control over your life as we age as you possibly can. So I am glad that you have all joined me and watched us this week. I look forward to seeing you all again next week. In the meantime, be well and be kind.
If you liked this video, please follow us on social media and subscribe on YouTube. For more information, visit rielderinfo.com or call 401-585-0509. If you have any questions, email deb@rielderinfo.com.